Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Magical Summer of Miranda Stone by A.D. Brazeau, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. The first time it happened, I thought it was hormonal, a delusion brought on by a painful cramps and a headache. I mean, auras of light don't just jump from your palms. Palms are palms, wrinkled, sometimes coarse, not the best conductors of electricity, not like fingertips after you walk on a thick carpet in woolly socks, then reach out to zap someone's arm. There was no sensation, no feeling of warmth, no tingle. All that would come later. When it happened, I was on my heating pad, staring at my lifeline, wondering how long I really had. It was so fleeting. I was sure the dancing blue and green light was all in my head. What other explanation could there be? I rubbed my damp hands on my sweatpants, eyes closing against the throb in my brain. The second time was a little weirder. The sun was bright as I batted away a bee in the garden. I was on my knees, weeding my mother's precious flower bed underneath the living room window, and the bee was relentless. I grasped one weed, pulled it out, then grabbed another. As I pulled the third, it died in my hand. Yes, that was generally the idea. Weeds die when you yank them from the ground, but they remain green, then rot later in the bin. These weeds were rotting in my hands. I dropped the putrefying yellow stem, wiped my gloved hand on the grass, and continued. I pulled two more in rapid succession. Each one decayed the second I made contact. Weird. I threw off the gloves, thinking they must be coated in some sort of pesticide, maybe a nuclear substance seeping up from the ground. That's when I noticed the bee, dead on its back in the long blades of grass. My stomach turned. I hadn't touched it or hadn't thought I had. Queasy sickness washed over me. I glanced over my shoulder. No one was around. I fisted a bunch of grass with my bare hand, but didn't pull it out. The emerald green turned yellow in my grasp. I ran inside and threw up. By the time I understood what was happening to me, I realized I was experiencing the same onset of magic other women around the globe were also grappling with. My parents started watching me out of the corners of their eyes. I could swear they were eavesdropping on my conversations. I was in danger. It was time to go. Mid-City, New Orleans, Louisiana, June. The flower-shaped sign of the Fleur-de-Lis Motel flashed an ominous neon yellow, more of a warning than a welcome. One of the flower's petals no longer pulsed at the same rhythm as the rest of the sign. It was dying, slowly ebbing out of existence, until it would wink out, betraying the others with its darkness. I tried not to let the bleak motel parking lot make me second-guess myself, but it was hard as I stood in the stifling New Orleans heat. It felt wrong to be parked outside a grungy motel at 2 a.m., alone. Wrong as it seemed, I was able to take such a full, deep breath that I wouldn't have turned back for anything. Sweat was trickling down the small of my back and pooling in my bra. Colorado was dry. I'd never felt this kind of humidity before. To save on gas, I had shut off the air conditioning, and now I felt like I was drowning in my bodily fluids. After spending 2 hours driving around the outskirts of the French Quarter, I had given up on finding a nicer hotel. My budget wouldn't allow for that. I wanted to heave at the stupidity of leaving with only $500 in my pocket. It seemed like so much at the time, a whole 19 hours ago. I should have spent more time budgeting and less time packing. The Fleur-de-Lis motel was the best I could do. According to the sign, it cost me $150 a week, which was still more than I had planned for. This meant I had no option but to find a job as soon as possible. Except for two sad, almost identical blue cars and one Harley-Davidson, the parking lot was deserted. The one-story L-shaped building looked like it might have been cool 60 years ago, but now was a near ramshackle mess with lighting that was hit or miss and paint peeling off every door. There was an unmistakable lack of anything pretty. A nervous flutter took up refuge in my heart. Was this place even safe? The surrounding area was mostly quiet, with the only sounds coming from the odd passing car on the next street over, which happened to be Canal. I knew enough about New Orleans to know it was a major road that shot all the way to the French Quarter. I hurried toward the office. There was a dim light on inside, barely visible through dingy curtains. An open sign was wedged between those cigarette smoke-stained drapes and the streaky glass of the window. I pulled open the screen door. The hinges groaned. I looked around in a panic. All I needed was to draw the attention of the undesirables who I managed were lurking in the nearby alley. I could add them to the list of people I was afraid of. I turned the worn brass doorknob and the door, white paint flaking as I pushed, opened without a fight. I stuck in my head and looked around. The rest of me wouldn't enter until I was sure the coast was clear. My head pounded, my stomach was queasy, and the heat had me close to passing out. The air inside was not any cooler than outside. Part of me wanted to curl up on the floor and just die. "Hello," I called out. Please let the proprietor be a nice little old lady. I wanted something, anything, to put me more at ease. There was nothing but a snore coming from somewhere in the dark recess behind the desk, and not the kind of snore a sweet old woman would make. I scooted the rest of the way in, out of the options and needing to sleep. The office was surprisingly bare and open. I expected bulletproof glass, but there was nothing other than a rack of touristy brochures and the simple high-topped desk that barred the way from where I stood. There was nothing warm, no plants, no chairs. State your business and get out, which was fine by me. As I stepped inside, I let go of the screen door. The metal frame hit the wood trim with such a loud clang my teeth vibrated. The snoring was replaced by a startled gasp. "Who the shit is that? This better be important." The voice was hoarse. I imagined the throat scarred by years of smoking and hard drinking. The face that emerged from somewhere behind the desk was rougher than the voice. I took a step back, my hand on the screen, ready to flee. The sour smell filled the air, sweat, and the bitterness of old coffee and stale cigarettes. What a mistake. I could sleep in my car tonight, then find somewhere better when the sun came up. Anywhere would be better than this hole. "Oh, I thought you were one of the tenants, always wanting some dumb thing in the middle of the night. You need a room?" The man barely looked at me. He reached down to pull out a worn book, its cover loose with age, and flipped to a blank page. His huge hands, as weathered as his face, could squeeze the life out of me in an instant. "Sign here, night of the week." I pondered what to do. I was so tired, and really, I had no idea what I was doing here. The man, although bulky and frightening at first, seemed to be all business, and I longed for a cold shower and a bed. With my mind made up, I stepped into the room and up to the counter. "The week, please." He looked at me, his hand wandering into a full gray beard. His belly shook as he stifled a silent laugh. "Please? Haven't heard anyone use actual manners in some time. Where are you from, girl? Midwest, I'm guessing. You 18? Anxiety took hold of my gut like a fist closing around my defenseless grape. My breath hitched. "Mm-hmm," I nodded, moving closer to the desk. I knew I looked older than my 16 years, but I didn't have much experience lying, especially not to adults. Passing this test, I decided, could only be done if I held myself with confidence. "It's $150, right?" Pulled my wallet from my vintage 1950s handbag. "I need to see some ID along with that cash." Even though the tired biker had clearly been sleeping, he still wore his leather vest imprinted with the Harley insignia over his heart. Deep breath. I planned for this. I handed him the money, then held out my identification with the bogus last name and address somewhere in Iowa I'd never heard of, procured for the bargain price of $50 from a boy who had been expelled from my school. This was done in one smooth motion. He looked me once in the face, then glanced down at the piece of plastic in my hand. When his eyes narrowed, the acid in my stomach swirled. "Keep smiling." "Sign the ledger," he said. I tried not to visibly relax. He moved away, grabbing a key from the wall behind him. I noticed there were hooks for 10 keys, each one numbered. Keys to rooms 4 and 7 were missing. "Room 3. He tossed the key on the counter, a loud clank that frayed my already damaged nerves. Room 3 was 2 rooms down from the office. I popped the trunk of my white Honda four-door to pull out my 2 suitcases, then shut it with as little force as possible. I looked around, uneasiness pulling at me. The lot was quiet. There wasn't a soul around. Nothing at all to be afraid of. I wedged my handbag under my arm and took up a case in each hand. My guitar would remain in the trunk for the night. I was too tired for a second trip. Tires screeched as headlights washed over the pavement, lighting the way to my room. I picked up the pace, not caring to find out what sort of creatures found refuge here in this wasteland. Then I realized I was one of them, at least for the next week. There was a dull thud as I dropped my bags at the door of room 3. The room number was crooked, like it was also too exhausted by the night to keep itself upright. As I pulled it out of the lock, the key slipped out of my sweaty hand, landing with a jingle on the cracked cement walk. At the same moment, a car door slammed in the parking lot behind me. I jumped, turning my body reflexively in the direction of the sound. It didn't matter that I hadn't ever been in a fight, that I had never had to physically protect myself. It was fight that pulsed through my veins, not flight. The young woman, not much more north of 20, that sauntered toward me was not who I expected to see. I guess I was expecting another biker or some strung-out lowlife. The woman, tired though she appeared with mascara smudged around each eye, was pretty in a California way. She was tall, bordering on bony, and her short blonde hair was mussed sexily. My gaze traveled down to her very short dress and platform heels. It was then I realized what she was. The dress she wore was shorter than Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. Wasn't even sure if I could call it a dress. My dad would call it underwear and would lock me in my room until I turned 30 if I so much looked at something like that. The man driving the truck she'd exited screeched away. I scooped up the key and fumbled it, trying desperately not to look at her, but also wanting to like she was some sort of exotic bird. From the corner of my eye, I watched her move up to the room next to mine. This woman was my neighbor. She was number 4. Her key crunched in the lock. She pushed the door open but didn't go inside. I realized I was still standing in the same position, turned away from my room, the key shaking in my hand. I'd never seen a prostitute before. They didn't roam the streets of my suburban Colorado Springs neighborhood. How should I address her? Should I address her? She was still standing in her open doorway. So as to not look like a complete weirdo, I did the polite thing and glanced up. She should have been a movie star, not a streetwalker. Her smile was tired but bright. She opened her mouth to speak, but then was cut off by a figure coming up fast behind her from down the concrete walkway. Honey, even in your cute little jeans, you look like a Romanian Audrey Hepburn, all dark and mysterious like you want to suck my blood, but not really. Look at that hair, Billy. The woman was talking to both me and the blonde. She reminded me of that one skinny kid from school who never filled out, dressed in a navy blue kimono that complemented her smooth, dark skin. People here must not eat much. She walked up behind the woman she called Billy and offered her a lit cigarette. The ember lost in the glare from the light over the door. Thanks, I think. I'm of Italian descent, actually, I said, like that mattered at all. I bit the inside of my lip, desperately wanting to seem much cooler than I was. Like I pulled up regularly to seedy motels and talked to unusual strangers every day. These people made me nervous, but the more I talked, the less I had to think about where I was, what I had done, and more importantly, what I was becoming. Oops, sorry. One should never assume, isn't that right? She bumped Billy with a shoulder and they laughed. Their laughter was musical and reminded me oddly of my mom. Instantly, I felt more at ease. This seemed like a conversation I might have next to my locker, not on the sidewalk of an axe murderer's paradise. You got that right, Billy said, holding her cigarette out to me. What's your name, Audrey Hepburn? I shook my head at the proffered smoke. Miranda. Oh, like Miranda from Sex and the City? I love it. The woman in the kimono snapped her fingers and began dancing. Her kimono opened to reveal a white tank top, the outline of a silver ring through a nipple clearly visible as it strained against fabric. I tried not to look at the nipple while blurting out and laugh at the dancing. Exactly like her. My mom loved that show. She always compared herself to Carrie, but I'm firmly in the Samantha Jones trisexual camp. She continued to undulate her hips as she snatched the cigarette back from Billy. I've never met anyone younger than 40 who knew Sex and the City so well, I said. This woman was definitely much younger than 40. They both were. Their tired but unlined faces glowed in the glaring harsh light. The woman with the nipple ring blew smoke from her lungs as she responded. Honey, it's a classic. Where did you blow in from? Colorado? The word fell out of my mouth before I could stop it. My breath hitched in the back of my throat. It already screwed up, and I'd already only been there 5 minutes, but then it wasn't as if these people were going to become actual friends. They'd probably forget as soon as they walked away. Oh, a mountain girl. Well, welcome to our little corner of the world, Miss Miranda. I'm Nita, and I'm off to dreamland. Nita handed the cigarette back to Billy, then spun around, the edge of her kimono flowing around her. She headed off farther down the building to where I assumed her room was. Billy turned to the retreating figure, smoke billowing from her red, slightly smeared lips. Night, Nita. Night, Miranda. And with that, I was alone. alone for the first time in my life in my own demented episode of the real world. The loneliness was a tangible thing. I was here for real. Here in a musty, cramped, decades-old motel room on the outskirts of a city as foreign to me as Tibet. Here, without any of the usual safety nets that back at home were always ready to catch me after any misstep. A misstep here could see me hauled off in handcuffs or sent home in a box.